typical ballistics equations don't necessarily account for force. Like conservation of energy, for example, conservation of momentum, are typical ballistics approaches to describe what's happening there quantitatively, but they don't give you force. And when you're using a force-sensitive simulation, you need to account for that. And so we actually got ballistic medium at the appropriate distance that was dictated by the medical examiner's description of the wound path. Then we got a bone simulant that matched the thickness of the cortical bone, at least in the sacrum that it smashed through, and then it embedded itself in the soft tissue of the buttock. And we recorded that load, and it was around 600 pounds, which sounds like a lot, but it doesn't last for a very long time. And so the overall momentum imparted to the model is actually quite low, but we're glad that we did the testing because it made the model more accurate and therefore more difficult to argue against. But there was other things as well. We did a dynamic shooting test and other things like that, and then we ran the model, and the model was simply, well, you can see the figure there for yourself. It's this humanoid that moves forward in space and time and then simply collapse on the ground. And believe it or not, the opposite side, and I quote, said, "Big whoop, you get shot, you fall down." And I said, okay, well, let's take a look at this a little bit more carefully here. And did you know, by the way, that if you fall in free fall from 3 feet, you can fracture your skull? And yet we're not seeing any fractures of the skull here. And yet the head was 3 feet off the ground when the fall started to occur. Because the second bullet, I should explain, actually went into the back of the neck, transected the spinal cord, effectively cutting any communication between the brain and the rest of the body. So we could assume at this point that the body was falling under the acceleration due to gravity alone, and that no muscular activity was assisting. So knowing that, then where did the load go? Because as I mentioned earlier, Eugene, you got to match the overall magnitude, location, and direction. And so if we didn't see a fracture in the skull, then where did the load go? And so what we found was, if you follow the model closely, that the first thing that make contact with the ground are the knees. And so that would obviously take up a lot of the load. And the beauty of these computer simulations is you can actually quantify that. The next thing that hit the ground was the elbows. And this now helped us confirm that the arms were in front of the body, reaching for the officer's primary firearm, which was part of the officer's narrative. And you can now see how piece by piece the result of the movement actually started to become consistent with the officer's narrative.